My name is Serena Voss. I'm 31 years old. And 3 months ago, I stood in the lobby of the most beautiful wedding venue I had ever seen, watching a woman I barely knew dismantle the most important day of my life with a single piece of paper. She didn't yell. She didn't cause a scene. She just handed a revised guest list to the venue manager and smiled like she was doing everyone a favor. My mother. My father. My 2 brothers. My grandmother, who had flown in from Tucson at 74 years old with a bad hip and a brand new dress she'd bought specifically for this day. All of them removed. Every single name. Gone. And the venue manager, a soft-spoken man named Gerald who I think genuinely had no idea what was happening, read that list aloud at the welcome table while my family stood right there holding their printed invitations. I want you to sit with that for a second. My grandmother. Standing in a lobby in her new dress. Hearing her own name excluded from her granddaughter's wedding. Out loud. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back. Not to the beginning of the wedding planning. Further back than that. Back to the first dinner I ever had with my mother-in-law, because that dinner was a map. And I was too busy being in love to read it. Marcus and I met at a work conference in Phoenix, 2.5 years before the wedding. He was presenting on supply chain logistics. I was there representing the marketing firm I worked for. We ended up at the same table during a lunch break and talked for 4 hours. Missed 2 panels each. Neither of us cared. He was warm, funny, genuinely curious about people in a way that felt rare. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. By the end of the conference, we had exchanged numbers and made vague plans to grab coffee that we both knew weren't vague at all. We were official within 6 weeks. Long distance for 4 months, Phoenix to Denver, until I transferred to a position closer to him. I gave up my apartment, my Thursday pottery class, and the best taco truck I have ever found in my life. I did it without hesitation because Marcus was the kind of person you rearrange things for. His mother, Vivian, was introduced to me at a restaurant called Harvest Table, a farm-to-table place in Scottsdale that she had chosen, made the reservation for, and arrived at 12 minutes before we did so she could pick the seating arrangement. I noticed that last part when Marcus mentioned it casually in the car on the way over. He said it like it was normal. I filed it away. Vivian Holloway was 58, immaculately dressed, and had the kind of posture that made you feel like you were slouching even when you weren't. She was a retired interior designer who had built a regional reputation over 30 years before selling her firm and spending her retirement the way some women play tennis. Aggressively. She hugged Marcus for a long time when we arrived. Then she turned to me with a smile that was full of teeth and almost entirely empty of warmth. "So you're the one who's been keeping my son busy," she said. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Dinner was 2 hours long. Vivian spent the first 45 minutes asking me questions that sounded like getting to know you conversation and functioned as an interview. Where did I go to school? What did my parents do? Did I own or rent? Was my family local? When I mentioned that my parents still lived in the same house in Albuquerque where I grew up, she smiled and said, "How sweet." Roots. The way she said roots made it sound like a polite word for something she considered lesser. By the end of the night I had a headache and a very specific feeling I couldn't name yet. It was the feeling of being assessed and found slightly lacking, but told you did fine anyway. Marcus asked me in the car what I thought of her. I said, "She's very put together." He said, "She liked you. Trust me, you'd know if she didn't." I turned toward the window and watched the lights of Scottsdale blur past and thought about the way she'd said how sweet about my childhood home. I should have asked more questions that night. I should have asked Marcus what it looked like when Vivian didn't like someone. What she did. How she handled it. Instead I told myself I was overthinking. That she was just a protective mother. That she would warm up once she got to know me. 18 months later, Marcus proposed at a small Italian restaurant near our apartment. No fanfare, no flash mob, no photographer hiding behind a plant. Just a quiet corner table, a ring that he had picked out himself based on something I'd pointed at in a window 6 months earlier, which meant he'd been planning it for at least half a year. He went down on one knee and his hands were shaking and he cried a little before he even got the words out, and I said yes before he finished asking. It was the best night of my life. Vivian called the next morning at 8:45. Marcus answered. I was still in bed, half awake, listening to his side of the conversation from the other room. Yes, Mom. Last night. I know. I know you wanted to be involved in the ring selection. I know. But Serena and I wanted it to be our moment. A long pause. Mom. Another pause. I understand. He came back into the bedroom with his phone in his hand and a look on his face I hadn't seen before. Not quite tired. Not quite defeated. Something older than both of those things. She's happy for us, he said. I nodded and smiled and did not ask about the pauses. That was the second map I didn't read. The wedding planning started 3 weeks later and Vivian arrived into it the way weather arrives. You don't negotiate with weather. You just try to stay dry. The first thing Vivian did was send Marcus a list of venues. Not suggestions. A list, typed up and emailed with a subject line that read options for the venue as though the search were already over and we just needed to select from what she'd approved. There were 4 venues on the list. All of them were in Scottsdale. Marcus and I lived in Denver. My entire family was in New Mexico. His father's side, the side of his family that Marcus actually grew up close to before his parents divorced, was spread between Colorado and Utah. I looked at the list and then looked at Marcus. He said, she means well. I said, Marcus, my grandmother can't fly. He said, let me talk to her. Whatever he said worked, partially. Vivian agreed to consider Denver venues but made it clear she was doing us a favor. She said the word Denver the way people say the word traffic. Like it was an inconvenience the universe had invented specifically to test her. We found our venue without her. A restored Victorian estate called Ashwood Hall on the eastern edge of the city. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a courtyard with string lights that looked like something out of a memory. The first time Marcus and I walked through it, we looked at each other and didn't even need to say anything. It was the place. We booked it that week. Vivian toured it the following weekend and spent 40 minutes pointing out things she would have done differently if she had been an interior designer hired to renovate it, which she had not been. She said the lighting in the east corridor was provincial. She asked the venue coordinator if they had considered a different floral arrangement near the entrance. The coordinator, a woman named Dana who had clearly dealt with mothers-in-law before, smiled through all of it with professional grace. I stood next to Marcus and kept my face neutral and reminded myself that Vivian was his mother and that this was important to him and that people like Vivian often just needed to feel heard. What I didn't fully understand yet was that feeling heard was not what Vivian wanted. What she wanted was control. Hearing was just the first step on the way to it. The guest list fight started 6 weeks into planning. Marcus and I had drafted our list together at our kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with coffee and a shared spreadsheet and a rule that we each got equal say. 220 guests total. His side, my side, roughly even. My family was not large but they were close. My parents, both brothers, their partners, my aunt and uncle from Santa Fe, 3 cousins I had grown up spending summers with, and my grandmother Rosa, who had been my father's mother and the woman who taught me to cook and read to me every night the summers the first spent with her and who cried when I called to tell her I was engaged. Rosa was at the top of my list. Vivian submitted her own separate list 2 weeks later. It arrived via email to Marcus with 240 names on it. Not suggestions for his consideration. A list that assumed it would be merged with ours and that the total would simply expand to accommodate it. Marcus and I sat with both lists for a full evening doing math that didn't work. The venue held 300 guests maximum including the wedding party. Vivian's list alone was 240. That left 60 spots for everyone else. My entire family plus Marcus's father's side fit inside that 60 if we cut every peripheral name and kept it blood only. Marcus called his mother. The conversation lasted an hour. I sat in the next room and listened to the rhythm of it, the way his voice went patient and then careful and then something that wasn't quite firm but was trying to be. When he came back he said Vivian had agreed to trim her list to 180. I did the math. 180 from her side, 40 from his father's side, left 80 for my entire family and any friends Marcus and I shared. It was not equal. But I looked at Marcus's face, at the tension sitting just behind his eyes, and I said okay. Because I loved him and because I thought this was a compromise and because I still believed that Vivian would eventually settle once she understood this was our wedding and not hers. I submitted our finalized joint list to Dana at Ashwood Hall in the first week of June. 296 names. Every one of them confirmed by both Marcus and me. I emailed Dana directly, CC'd Marcus, saved the confirmation she sent back, and printed a copy that I kept in the wedding folder I had been building since month 1. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that 4 weeks before the wedding Vivian would call Dana directly. Without telling Marcus. Without telling me. And that she would submit a revised guest list. With 112 names removed. Including every single person on my side of the family. I found out the way you find out about the worst things. Not in a quiet moment when you have time to process. In public. In front of everyone. On the day itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The month before the wedding was a controlled kind of chaos that I think every bride experiences no matter how organized she is. Seating charts and menu confirmations and dress fittings and the specific particular stress of trying to coordinate shuttle times for guests coming from 3 different hotels. I was managing most of it myself because Marcus was in the middle of a project deadline at work and because I am, if I am being honest about myself, a person who finds it easier to do things than to delegate them. My mother called every few days. Not to ask for updates. Just to talk. She'd ask how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether Marcus was being helpful. My mother has always understood that the best support is not advice. It's just presence. I would tell her I was fine, a little stressed, and she would say she was proud of me and that she couldn't wait to see me walk down that aisle. My grandmother Rosa called once a week. She'd been practicing a small speech she wanted to give at the reception. Not a formal toast, just a few words. She'd been writing it in a notebook she kept on her nightstand. She told me that on one of our calls, her voice careful and a little shy about it, like she wasn't sure if it was appropriate to want that. I told her it was more than appropriate. I told her I wanted nothing more. 2 weeks before the wedding Vivian invited herself to Denver for what she called a final coordination visit. She stayed at a hotel nearby and spent 3 days attending every vendor meeting Marcus and I had scheduled, offering opinions on things that had already been decided, and having long private phone calls that she took in the hotel lobby whenever Marcus and I were in the same room. On her last evening in Denver she took us to dinner at a steakhouse she had researched and reserved without asking what we felt like eating. Over the entree she told us she had taken the liberty of consulting with a calligrapher about upgrading the place cards. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that the place cards were already ordered and paid for. She said, of course, and moved on to something else. In the car on the way home Marcus said, she's trying to help. I said, I know. I didn't say what I was actually thinking, which was that helping and controlling are 2 different things and his mother had never once confused them. The morning of the wedding I woke up at 5:47 without an alarm. The room was gray and still. Marcus was asleep beside me. I lay there for a few minutes just breathing, listening to the quiet, trying to hold it before the day took over. I had a ritual I had been planning for months. Breakfast with my mother and my grandmother and my 2 bridesmaids, my best friend Kala and my cousin Danny, at a small cafe 2 blocks from the hotel where my family was staying. Nothing elaborate. Eggs and coffee and whatever pastries they had. Just us, before the noise started. My mother had texted the night before to say Rosa was tired from the trip but excited. The drive from Tucson had taken 2 days because Rosa refused to fly anymore after a turbulence incident 3 years ago that she described as the most frightening experience of her life and that everyone else on the plane apparently considered routine. She had ridden with my Uncle Felix, who had driven straight through with one overnight stop and delivered her to Denver at 10 in the morning looking slightly road-worn but determined. Breakfast was everything I needed it to be. Rosa ordered oatmeal and ate it slowly and told the story of my parents' wedding, which she had attended in 1988, and how my mother had cried so hard during the vows that her mascara ran down to her chin and my father had wiped it off with his thumb without breaking eye contact. My mother laughed and said the mascara story was an exaggeration and Rosa said it absolutely was not, and I sat between them and felt, for a clear shining moment, like everything was going to be fine. We parted at 9:30. My family would arrive at Ashwood Hall at noon for the 2 o'clock ceremony. I went to get ready. Hair and makeup took 2 hours. Calla was beside me the whole time, keeping the conversation light, refilling my coffee when it got cold, fielding texts on my behalf when my phone started going off with the small logistical questions that multiply on wedding days. At 11:15 my dress went on. At 11:45 I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in the bridal suite at Ashwood Hall and felt, genuinely, like myself. Like the best version of a self I had been building for 31 years. Marcus texted from the groom's suite down the hall, "You ready for this?" I texted back, "More than." His response was a single red heart. The first guests began arriving at noon. I was not in the lobby. I was in the bridal suite with Calla and Danny, going over the timeline one last time with Dana, who had been nothing but professional and kind throughout this entire process. At 12:20 Dana excused herself to manage arrivals and I settled into the particular stillness of the hour before a ceremony where there is nothing left to do but wait. At 12:47 my phone rang. It was my brother Theo. I answered because Theo doesn't call unless something is wrong. He has texted exclusively since approximately 2016. Serena. His voice was flat in the specific way voices go flat when someone is working very hard to stay calm. There's a situation in the lobby. I stood up. What kind of situation? Mom and Dad and Rosa are here. And the guy at the welcome table is telling them their names aren't on the list. I heard the words. I processed them individually. I could not make them form a sentence that made sense. Say that again. Their names aren't on the list, Serena. None of us are. Mom, Dad, me, Marco, Rosa. The guy has a list and none of us are on it. I looked at Calla. She had heard enough from my face to be already moving, already reaching for my phone, already shifting into the mode she has been in for the 15 years we have been friends, where she becomes a person of decisive and immediate action. I'm coming down, I said. Calla said, "You are not going down there alone." She was right. She came with me. The lobby of Ashwood Hall is a wide open space with original crown molding and a black and white marble floor and a welcome table set up near the entrance where Dana's assistant, a young man named Gerald with round glasses and an earnest manner, had been stationed to check in guests and hand out programs. When I came around the corner from the corridor I saw my family before they saw me. My father standing very straight the way he does when he is upset and refusing to show it. My mother beside him with her hand on his arm and a look on her face I recognized from childhood as the look she gets when she is deciding whether to cry or not and choosing not. My brother Theo behind them with his jaw set. My brother Marco next to him. My aunt and uncle slightly to the side. And Rosa. My grandmother Rosa in the dress she had bought for this day, pale blue with small white flowers, standing with her hands clasped in front of her and a stillness about her that was not peace. It was the stillness of a person absorbing something painful and choosing not to give it the dignity of a visible reaction. Vivian was standing near Gerald. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just there, present, positioned slightly between my family and the welcome table. Gerald was holding a piece of paper. I walked across that marble floor and I felt every step. "Gerald," I said. He looked up. Relief crossed his face immediately, and then something else, something uncomfortable, something that told me he had been in an impossible position and had not known how to get out of it. Ms. Voss, I'm so glad you're here. There seems to be a discrepancy with the guest list. I have a revised copy here that was submitted last month, and the names of these guests aren't appearing on it. I want to make sure we get this sorted out before the ceremony. He said it clearly and calmly because he was a professional doing his job. He said it in a lobby where a dozen other guests were arriving and filtering past and registering, with the particular sharpened attention of people who sensed something happening, that something was not quite right. He said it while my grandmother stood 3 feet away. I looked at the paper in Gerald's hand. Then I looked at Vivian. She met my eyes and did not look away. There are moments in your life where time does something strange. It doesn't stop exactly. It just becomes very dense. Every detail sharpens. The sound in the room separates into individual threads. You notice things you would never normally notice, the slight scuff on Gerald's left shoe, the way my mother's earrings caught the light, the particular set of Vivian's shoulders that I now recognized, that I should have recognized months ago, as the posture of a woman who had already decided how this was going to go. I said, "Can I see that list, Gerald?" He handed it to me. I looked at it. It was printed on plain white paper. At the top it said revised guest list, Ashwood Hall, Holloway Voss wedding. Submitted June 14th. A date 4 weeks before our wedding. A date I had not known about. My family's names were not on it. Not one of them. I turned to Vivian. Did you submit this? She didn't answer immediately. She had the expression of someone who is prepared for this conversation and is deciding which version of it to deliver. There were some adjustments that needed to be made, she said. The numbers were running over. Some difficult choices had to be made for the good of the event. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because I think it matters. I did not feel the hot immediate anger you might expect. What I felt was colder than that. And quieter. It was the feeling of something becoming undeniably clear that you had been half seeing for a long time, like a room coming into focus after a long time in the dark. She had submitted a revised guest list 4 weeks ago. She had done it without telling me. Without telling Marcus. She had removed my entire family from a wedding that I was the bride of. And she had done it as a logistical decision. Something to be managed. Something she was entitled to manage. My grandmother was standing 3 feet away. I looked at my grandmother first. Rosa had not moved. She was watching me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. It was not embarrassment. It was not anger. It was love, steady and patient, waiting for me to do whatever I needed to do. She had been watching me my whole life with that expression. Standing back and making space. Trusting me. I folded the revised list once. Held it at my side. Then I turned back to Gerald and I said, very clearly, Gerald, I need you to pull up the original guest list. The one I submitted on June 2nd. It should be in the venue system under my name as the primary contact. Gerald glanced at Vivian. Then at me. Then he turned to the laptop on the welcome table and typed for a moment. I have it here, Ms. Voss. That is the list we are using today. Please discard the revised copy. Gerald nodded, relieved in the way of a man who had wanted someone to make this decision for the past 20 minutes and was grateful someone finally had. He took the paper from my hand and set it face down on the table. Vivian said, Serena, I think we should discuss this privately. I said, there's nothing to discuss. These are my guests. They're on my list. They're coming in. I turned to my family. My father's expression had shifted. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Theo was very still. Rosa was watching me with those steady eyes. I'm so sorry, I said. And I meant it for all of it. For the confusion at the door and for the fact that I had not seen this coming clearly enough to prevent it. For the minute and a half my grandmother had stood in a lobby hearing her name read off a list she wasn't on. Please come in. You are absolutely supposed to be here. My mother came forward first and hugged me. Not a long hug. The wedding morning kind, careful not to disturb the dress or the hair, just a hand on my back and a cheek pressed briefly to mine. She whispered, "We're here, baby. Go get married." Rosa took my hand when she reached me. Her hand was small and warm and dry. She squeezed once. She said nothing. She didn't need to. I walked them to Dana's assistant at the inner door and asked her to seat my family in the reserved section on the bride's side. She did it without hesitation. I did not look at Vivian as I walked back through the lobby. I didn't need to. I heard her behind me, the specific silence of a person who expected to be followed into an argument and has found themselves standing alone. Marcus found me in the hallway outside the bridal suite 5 minutes later. Someone had told him, probably Kala, probably immediately, because Kala has been my friend since we were 16 and she understands that I need information and I need it fast. He looked at me. His face was doing the thing it does when he is trying to stay calm and is not entirely succeeding. "Serena, I didn't know. I need you to know that. I did not know she did this." "I know," I said. And I believed him. Because Marcus is not his mother and because the shock on his face was real and because in 2 years of being with him he had never once looked at me the way Vivian looked at me in that lobby. Like I was a variable in her equation. "I'm going to talk to her," he said. "After," I said. "Marcus. We're getting married in an hour and 15 minutes. After." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He cupped my face in both hands and said, "You are extraordinary." "You know that?" I said, "Go back to your suite. I'll see you at the altar." He kissed my forehead and went. I stood in the hallway for 30 seconds by myself. Let the noise of the building settle around me. Guests arriving, the faint sound of the string quartet warming up in the ceremony room, the distant click of heels on marble. Then I went back into the bridal suite, sat down in front of the mirror, and let Kala fix the one curl that had come loose during all of it. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And I was. Not because nothing had happened. But because my grandmother was inside. And I was about to get married. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock and it was, despite everything that had happened in the hour before it, the most beautiful thing I have ever been part of. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. He had been quiet since the lobby. My father is a man of few words under normal circumstances, and this was not normal circumstances, but his silence as we stood in the back waiting for our cue was not the silence of someone suppressing distress. It was the silence of a man fully present, fully there, giving me every bit of his attention. Just before we started walking he said, "I'm proud of you, Mija. Not just today. Every day." I made it about halfway down the aisle before I started crying. Marcus cried too. Our officiant, our friend Joel, who had known us both since before we were together and who had gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, teared up reading the opening. The string quartet played the song Marcus and I had chosen together at 11 at night 6 months ago when we were lying on the floor of our living room going through playlists and landed on something that made us both go quiet. My grandmother Rosa sat in the front row on my side and watched the whole thing with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright. Vivian sat on the other side. I was aware of her presence the way you are aware of a draft, not looking directly at it but feeling it at the edge of things. We said our vows. The ones we had written ourselves, separately, without showing each other in advance, which Joel had told us was either a beautiful act of trust or a logistical gamble and had turned out to be both. Marcus went first. His voice cracked twice. He talked about the conference in Phoenix, about the 4-hour lunch, about the fact that he had known within 40 minutes that this was different from anything before. He said, "I had been looking for someone who makes ordinary things feel like they matter. You make everything matter. I'm not letting go of that." I did not have the presence of mind to respond with anything as articulate as what he had said. I told him that I had moved across a distance for him and would do it again and again. That the life we had built together was the most real thing I had ever inhabited. That I intended to spend the rest of mine in it, next to him, choosing him specifically every day for all the days there were. Joel pronounced us married. Marcus kissed me. The room made the sound rooms make when 296 people all feel the same thing at once. The reception was in the east wing of Ashwood Hall, the space Vivian had called provincial during her tour and that looked that evening, dressed in warm light and white flowers and full of people I loved, like nothing she had imagined and everything I had. The first hour was photographs and cocktails. I moved through the room with Marcus and felt the specific joy of seeing people you love in the same space, my college roommate talking to Marcus's childhood friend, my aunt discovering a shared connection with Marcus's uncle from Colorado, the particular small miracle of a wedding where the two worlds actually mix. My grandmother found me during the cocktail hour. She was holding a small glass of white wine and she looked, despite the day's beginning, genuinely happy. She said, "You handled that beautifully." At the door. I said, "I'm sorry it happened." She shook her head. "Don't apologize for something someone else did. You fixed it in 2 minutes flat. That's all that matters." She squeezed my hand again, the same squeeze as the lobby, and moved off to find a seat. Calla appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. She said, "For the record, what you did in that lobby was one of the most composed things I have ever witnessed." I had no idea what I was doing, I said. "I know," she said. "That's what made it impressive." Marcus was across the room talking to his father, a quiet man named Robert who had driven down from Fort Collins and who had always been kind to me in the uncomplicated way of someone who is simply glad his son is happy. Robert caught my eye across the room and raised his glass slightly. I raised mine back. Vivian was at a table near the far window. She was speaking to one of her friends from Scottsdale, a woman in a yellow dress who was one of the 180 on Vivian's list. Vivian had not spoken to me since the lobby. She had watched me walk down the aisle and she had watched me say my vows and she had watched me become a wife and she had said nothing. I did not go to her. I was not ready. The speeches started at 7. Joel went first. Then Calla, who had written something funny and kind that made the room laugh twice and then go quiet at the end in the way of something true. Then my brother Theo, who is not a public speaker and knows it and stood up anyway and said 7 sentences that included the words "She taught me what it looks like to do right by people" and sat back down to the longest applause of the evening. And then Rosa. My grandmother stood up slowly. My uncle Felix moved to help her and she waved him off with a small dignified gesture. She was holding her notebook, the one from her nightstand, but she set it on the table after a moment and did not look at it again. She spoke for 4 minutes. She talked about the first time she held me, the summer visits, the cooking lessons, the reading at night. She talked about the woman she had watched me become. She said, "My granddaughter walked through a door today that someone tried to close. She opened it herself. That is not a wedding story. That is a life story." The room was very quiet. Then she looked at Marcus and said, "Take care of her. She's the best thing we made." Marcus was openly crying. I was openly crying. I looked across the table and even Robert, the quiet man from Fort Collins, was pressing his lips together hard. At the table by the far window, Vivian was not crying. She was looking at her hands. The rest of the reception was everything a reception should be. Dancing and food and the specific joyful blur of a night you know you will spend years trying to remember in full, knowing even as it happens that the details will go soft at the edges. What stays is the feeling. And the feeling was everything I had hoped for and nothing Vivian had touched. Marcus and I had our first dance to the song from the living room floor. His hand was warm at my back and he held me like he was paying attention, not performing, just holding on. I pressed my face briefly against his shoulder and breathed and felt the weight of the day settle and shift into something I could carry forward. At 10:30 the dancing was still going. My parents were on the floor, which almost never happens. My father is not a dancer. He was making an exception, which is his private language for I love you. Rosa was seated near the speakers watching with the expression of someone fully satisfied, hands folded, wine mostly untouched, entirely present. Marcus found me near the bar at 10:45 and said, "Can we talk for a minute? Somewhere quiet?" We slipped out through a side door into the small courtyard behind the east wing. The string lights were on. The air was cool. The sound of the music came through the walls muffled and warm. He said, "I talked to my mother." I waited. I pulled her aside after the speeches. She admitted she submitted the revised list. She said she thought the numbers were unworkable and she didn't want to bother us with the details. That's what she called it. The details. I said, "My grandmother was in that lobby, Marcus." "I know." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something that had been building all day, all month, possibly longer. I told her that what she did was not a logistical decision. It was a deliberate choice to remove your family from our wedding without telling either of us. And that I am her son and I love her, and what she did today was not okay. What did she say? She said she was trying to make things easier for us. And then she said that some people have different ideas about how family events should be run. He paused. I told her that this was our family event and that our ideas were the ones that applied. I looked at the string lights above us for a moment. How did she take that? She didn't respond. She just looked at me for a long time and then went back inside. He turned toward me. "Serena, I need you to know that I see what has been happening. I've been making excuses. Not to you, but to myself. Telling myself she means well, she'll warm up, she just needs time. And all of that may be partially true, but none of it justifies this. None of it." This was the thing about Marcus. The thing I had loved since a 4-hour lunch in Phoenix. He was honest about himself in the way people rarely are. He did not perform reflection. He just did it, quietly, and then told you what he found. I said, "I need things to be different going forward. I need us to be a unit, Marcus. When something involves our family, our home, our life, it goes through us. Together. Not around us." "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "And I need to have a conversation with your mother. Not tonight. But it needs to happen. I know. And I'll be there for it." We stood in the courtyard for another few minutes without talking. The music inside shifted to something slower. Through the glass door I could see my parents still on the floor, my father's hand at my mother's back, her head tilted toward his shoulder. Marcus followed my gaze. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your family is wonderful." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry they started the day the way they did." "They're here," I said. "That's what matters." He took my hand. We went back inside. I did not speak to Vivian that night. I saw her near the exit around 11, coat already on, saying goodbye to the friends she had brought from Scottsdale. She saw me across the room and for a moment we looked at each other. I did not go to her. I was not punishing her. I was simply not ready. She left without finding me. I danced with my grandmother twice. The second time, near the end of the night, she held both my hands and we moved slowly in a small circle and she said, "This was a good day." I said, "Yeah. It was." "Even with the beginning?" "Even with the beginning." She smiled. "Good. Because how you handle the beginning is the whole story." Marcus and I left at midnight. The last thing I saw as we went through the main doors was my mother hugging Dana, thanking her with the warmth my mother brings to every room she enters. Dana caught my eye over my mother's shoulder and gave me a small private smile, the smile of a woman who has seen everything in this business and recognized what had happened today for what it was. A bride who held the door. I smiled back. Then the night closed around us and the rest was ours. The week after a wedding is its own particular kind of strange. You have been building towards something for months, every day oriented toward a single point on the calendar, And then it arrives and passes, and you are left in a Tuesday that looks like any other Tuesday except that everything is different. Marcus and I had a short honeymoon planned, 5 days in a rented house in the mountains outside Telluride. We left 2 days after the wedding. The drive took 4 hours and we spent most of it talking about the day, going over it the way you do when something has mattered, wanting to hold on to all of it, even the hard parts, because the hard parts are also the day. He said, somewhere near the halfway point of the drive with the mountains just beginning to come into view, I called my mother this morning. I turned to look at him. I wanted to give it a day before we had the bigger conversation. But I needed to say one more thing to her. What did you say? I told her that I had been thinking about the pattern. Not just the guest list. The venue list she sent. The calligrapher. The way she positioned herself in every vendor meeting. The way she arrived at our planning process and assumed she was running it. He kept his eyes on the road. I told her that I could see now that I had been minimizing it. That every time she did something and I told you she meant well, I was telling you that your discomfort didn't matter as much as her intentions. And I'm sorry for that. I was quiet for a moment. Did she respond? She said she felt like she was being attacked. That she had only ever wanted to be involved. That she didn't understand why she was being made into the villain. He exhaled. And then I said something I probably should have said a long time ago. What? I said, Mom, you went around my wife on our wedding day and removed her family from the guest list. I'm not attacking you. I'm telling you what happened. And you're going to need to sit with that. The mountains ahead of us had gone from a blue suggestion to a solid presence. I watched them for a moment. She said she needed time to think, Marcus said. Good, I said. So do we. The mountain house was small and warm with a wood stove and a porch that faced west and caught the sunset perfectly. We spent 5 days walking trails and cooking bad pasta and sleeping without alarms and talking, really talking. The kind you can only do when there is nothing else demanding your attention. On the third evening we sat on the porch with tea and watched the light go gold across the ridge and Marcus said, What do you want? With my mother. Going forward. What does it need to look like? I had been thinking about this since the lobby. Not out of anger, I want to be clear about that, because anger makes for bad decisions and I had learned from watching Vivian that the worst damage is done quietly, in the guise of management. I had been thinking about it the way you think about a problem you actually want to solve. I want honesty, I said. From all three of us. I want her to acknowledge what she did. Not just to you, to me. And I want it to be real. Not a social performance of acknowledgement, not a sorry if you were upset. Something real. Okay. And I want a boundary that is actually enforced. Not stated and then quietly abandoned every time she pushes. If she calls the venue for our anniversary party, if she submits revised anything without asking us, we address it immediately. Not later. Not when it's convenient. Yes. I don't want to cut her out, Marcus. She's your mother. But I also will not spend the next 30 years being managed by her. He nodded. He looked at the ridge and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I've spent my whole life watching her run things. Events, relationships, the narrative of our family. And I think I normalized it. I thought that was just how she was and the people around her were supposed to accommodate it. And now? Now I understand that accommodation has a cost. And I've been handing that cost to you. I reached across and took his hand. We fix it together, I said. Together, he said. We came back from Telluride on a Sunday. There were flowers on our kitchen counter. Kala had let herself in with the key we keep under a particular stone in the planter outside our door, and she had left flowers and a card that said on the front you did it and on the inside the real work starts now, in her handwriting, with a small drawing of a door. I put the card on our refrigerator. The call with Vivian happened the following Thursday. Marcus set it up. We sat together on our couch, his laptop open on the coffee table, her face on the screen looking slightly formal, like someone who had also prepared. She looked older on the screen than she had at the wedding. Not dramatically. Just by the degree that a week of something difficult adds to a face. She had her posture, the posture that never left her, but something around her eyes was different. Less armored. Marcus spoke first. He said, "Mom, we asked to have this conversation because what happened at the wedding needs to be addressed directly. Not managed or moved past. Addressed." Vivian said, "I understand. I'd like Serena to speak." She turned her gaze to me. I held it. "Vivian," I said, "I'm not going to go back through all of it. You know what happened. You submitted a revised guest list that removed my entire family from our wedding. My grandmother was standing in that lobby when Gerald read that list aloud. She is 74 years old and she drove 2 days to be there, and she stood there in the dress she bought for the occasion and heard her name read off a list she wasn't on. I need you to understand the specific weight of that." Vivian was quiet. "I'm not asking you to be someone different than you are," I continued. "I'm not asking you to become a different kind of person overnight. But I am telling you that what you did had a real effect on real people I love, and if we are going to have a relationship, I need to hear you say that you understand that." The silence lasted long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Vivian said, "You're right." 2 words. Quiet. Without performance. What I did was controlling. I told myself I was solving a problem and I didn't stop to consider what it would cost other people. She paused. "I've been thinking about your grandmother all week. In the lobby. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." "Good," I said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. I owe her an apology. I'd like to write to her, if you'll give me her address. I looked at Marcus. He gave me the smallest nod. "I'll give you her address," I said. Marcus said, "Mom, I need to say something too. I've spent a long time explaining you to Serena instead of advocating for her. I'm not going to do that anymore. When we have events, when we make decisions about our lives, they go through us together. Not around us. If you want to be part of our lives going forward, that's the structure." Vivian looked at her son for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not defeat. Something that might have been, if I am reading it generously, the beginning of understanding. She said, "I hear you." Not "I agree." Not "of course." "I hear you." Which was, given everything, more honest than a full concession would have been. We ended the call 20 minutes later. Not warmly, not coldly. Carefully. Like people handling something fragile and choosing to do it properly. Marcus closed the laptop. We sat together on the couch. The city sounds came through the window, the ordinary ambient noise of a life continuing. He said, "How do you feel?" "Cautious," I said. "But okay." He put his arm around me and I leaned into it. "It won't all be fixed from one conversation," I said. "No," he agreed. But it was a real conversation. Maybe that's the beginning. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at my parents' house in Albuquerque addressed to Rosa. My mother called me when Rosa had read it. She said Rosa had been quiet for a while after, and then she had said, "Well, she wrote it herself." That's something. My mother said, "Is it enough?" I said, "I don't know yet." But Rosa said it was something. I'll take something. Vivian did not submit any lists or plans or alternatives regarding the dinner we hosted 3 months later. She attended. She brought wine she had asked Marcus to confirm I liked before purchasing. She sat next to my mother at the table. I do not know exactly what they said to each other because I was in the kitchen at the time, but my mother found me afterward and said, "She's trying." My mother is a generous reader of people. She extends interpretation in the direction of kindness whenever she can. I have inherited some of this, and I am trying to inherit more of it. Not to excuse what happened. Not to minimize it. But because the alternative, carrying it forward at full weight indefinitely, is too expensive for me and not expensive enough for anyone else. Marcus and I are still figuring out the architecture of things. What a real relationship with his mother looks like. Where the lines are and how to hold them without turning them into walls. It is ongoing work. Some weeks it is easier than others. What I know is this. The person I was in that lobby, the one who folded the revised list and handed it back and said clearly and without flinching, "We are using my list, I want to keep being that person." Not because it felt powerful in the moment. But because it felt true. I had spent months finding reasons to believe Vivian would come around, would warm up, would eventually settle into something workable. I told myself the same stories Marcus had been telling himself. She means well. She'll adjust. Give her time. What I did not fully understand until that marble floor and my grandmother's face was that the cost of that patience was being paid by the wrong people. I was absorbing it. My family was absorbing it. Rosa was standing in a lobby absorbing it while Vivian moved forward with quiet certainty because no one had yet given her a clear reason to stop. The moment I gave her a reason, clearly and without drama, things began to change. Not everything. Not overnight. But the direction changed. That matters. 6 months have passed since the wedding at Ashwood Hall. Marcus and I are settled into our life in a way that feels different from before, more deliberate. We make decisions together with a kind of conscious intention we didn't always practice. We talk about things before they become problems when we can. It is not a perfect system because no system is, but it is ours and that makes it workable. Rosa is back in Tucson. She and my Uncle Felix have resumed their routine, which involves a morning walk, a particular diner where she orders the same thing every time, and a standing Sunday call with my mother that has expanded on alternating weeks to include me. We talk for an hour, sometimes more. She is writing something. Not the speech she prepared for my wedding, but something new, something longer. She won't tell me what it is. She says I'll see it when it's done. I started seeing a therapist 4 months ago. Not because of the wedding specifically, but because of what the wedding illuminated about me. I have a pattern the therapist identified in our second session with a gentleness that somehow made it land harder. She called it over-accommodation. The habit of adjusting and absorbing and smoothing over until you have made yourself so small that people stop being able to see you clearly. I have been doing this my whole adult life in various relationships, with colleagues, with friends, with Marcus's mother. Treating my own discomfort as a logistical problem rather than information. I am learning to treat it as information. Vivian and I are not close. I want to be honest about that rather than offer you a resolution that isn't quite real. We are cordial. We are making genuine effort on both sides. She has not, in 6 months, gone around me on anything. She asks before she suggests. She waits to be included rather than inserting herself. It is not transformation. It is adjustment. Adjustment over time, sustained, becomes something else eventually. I am giving it time. Marcus is good. He is the reason I am giving it time, partly. Not because of what he asked of me, but because of what he asked of himself. He saw his pattern and he named it and he changed it. That is not a small thing. Most people see their patterns, name them, and then defend them. He did not do that. It is one of the things I love most about him, and I am realizing I love it more now than I did before, now that I've seen it tested. What I want to tell you is something Rosa said on one of our Sunday calls, 2 months after the wedding. We were talking about the lobby, which we had not discussed directly since the day itself. She brought it up. She said, "I want you to know something." Standing there that morning, hearing Gerald read that list. It was hard. I won't pretend it wasn't. I said, "I know. I'm so sorry." "Let me finish," she said, in the specific tone that means she is not looking for comfort, she is trying to give you something. It was hard. And then you came around that corner and I watched you walk across that floor and I watched you handle it. And I thought, there she is. There is my girl. I didn't say anything for a moment. The beginning of things tells you everything, she said. Not the way things go wrong, but the way people handle it when they do. I have thought about that a lot in the months since. The way people handle things when they go wrong. Not the problems themselves. The handling. I did not handle that morning perfectly. I did not see it coming. I did not prevent it. My grandmother stood in a lobby in her good dress and heard her name read aloud from a list she was not on. That happened and it cannot unhappen, and I carry a small version of it with me. But I walked across a marble floor. I took back my list. I opened the door. I walked my family inside. That is what I want you to take from this. Not the revenge plot, not the dramatic confrontation, not the satisfying collapse of the person who wronged you. What I want you to take is simpler and harder. When someone closes the door on the people who matter to you, you have a choice. You can stand outside it, waiting for them to open it again, or you can open it yourself. I have spent a lot of my adult life waiting outside doors. Adjusting my expectations. Telling myself the door was probably not closed the way I thought it was. Being patient with people who were using my patience as a resource. The morning of my wedding I stopped waiting. I walked across that floor and I said, clearly, we are using my list, these people are my guests, they are coming inside. It cost me nothing. It gave me everything. My grandmother sat in the front row. She watched me walk down the aisle on my father's arm. She watched me say my vows. She stood up at the reception and talked about me with the particular love of someone who has known you your whole life and wanted the whole room to know it. She was there. That is the only ending that matters. If you are living a version of this, and I think some of you are, I want to ask you one thing. Who is standing outside a door right now because someone else decided they didn't belong? And what would it cost you to open it? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading every one. If this story stayed with you, the like button helps more than you know. And if you want to stay for stories like this one, about the moments that test us and what we find out about ourselves when they do, subscribe. I'll be here every week. Thank you for staying until the end. It means everything.